Welcome back to Questing Beast. Today we're going to be taking a look at a way to draw mountains for your Dungeons & Dragons fantasy maps. And that is a way that looks a lot more three-dimensional. It looks a lot more realistic. It kind of pops out of the map a bit better than you typically see with different strategies for doing mountain drawing. So step one is let's work on the basic geometry of what a three-dimensional mountain is going to look like. So to show you what I mean, we're going to start off by just drawing a couple ovals here. And what these ovals are going to represent is the mountain's footprint. The base of a mountain is not exactly circular, but the oval does a pretty good job of representing that, especially since we're looking at the mountain from a kind of 45-degree angle. So what we're going to do now is establish where the top of the mountain is. And so what you would want to do is measure right from the center and go up as high as you wanted the tip of your mountain to be. If you go up really high, then you're going to be getting a very steep mountain. I recommend only going up about, that high or so. And then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to be drawing the slopes. But what an actual mountain has, it tends to have ridge lines that slope up to near the peak and go down the sides. It's not like a perfect cone. So what this is going to look like is just start drawing your slopes, these curved lines. It's almost like a tent that's being held up in the center by a pole of some sort. So something like that. That can work pretty well as your basic outline for the mountain. You can have mountains that are a lot, not as high, that are a lot lower. So you could go down like that, for example, and you would end up with a situation that looks more like this. So in a situation like this, you can actually see at least partially what's going on behind the mountain just because the peak is not very high. And you'll be able to get basically the same effects. All right, so that's our basic geometry that we're going for here. You can either draw this very lightly and draw more darkly over it and then erase your under drawings, or you can get the hang of these basic shapes and then use a darker coloring in strategy to get more detail on top of that. So let me show you what I mean here. So again, we're going to start with a basic oval shape. Let's get more detail here now that we have a general understanding of what we're going for. Draw a very light oval because I'll be probably erasing that later. Let's get the tip of our mountain. Let's say it's going to be right about here. And when I draw in the edges or these ridge lines coming down from the mountain, I'm going to make them a lot darker. I'm going to make them a bit more rugged, a bit more jagged. And what we're going to do is use those to get a more three-dimensional effect, especially when we put in the shading, when we consider the direction of the sun. So let's just have our basic sides of the mountain. Just go down like this. Notice that they don't go all the way up to here. They go down more to here. This is because you can get some slopes that show you a little bit behind the mountain, and that makes it look even more three-dimensional. Something like that. All right, now let's add some ridge lines in there. You don't need too many of them. Maybe something like this. And go down to all the way to the edge of the circle, because you want, if you have your slopes end here and here, the actual mountain's going to go down quite a bit further below that. That helps it look a lot more three-dimensional. Typically, when a lot of people draw mountains, what happens is they have their slopes kind of like this, and then maybe they shade it in like this, but it looks very 2D because the bottom of the mountain is level with the edges of the slopes. So it looks like a sticker that's pasted on there rather than something that's kind of popping out of the picture. So let's add a few more in here. Maybe something like this. You can even have ones that kind of branch off a little bit like that. That's fine. That's basically all you really need. We're going to add a little bit of slope in the background as well, kind of behind the mountain, showing how you can see a little bit of what's going on back there. And now where the magic comes in is the way that we're going to be shading in the shadows and these crags in between these legs of the mountain that are kind of coming out here, these ridge lines. So whenever I do my shading, I imagine that the sun is coming from about this angle. It's coming from the right. I don't know why. I guess you could do it from the left if you wanted to, but that's just the way that I typically do it. And so that means that this side's going to be brighter than this side. And also that shadows are going to be cast by the sun hitting these ridge lines. So for example, over here, you're going to have a pretty dark shadow coming down off of this ridge line like this, and then sloping off. You want it to come down pretty sharply there. Whereas on this ridge, this side of it right here is being hit by the sun, so it's going to be brighter. Something like that. Same deal over here. The sun is hitting this ridge, making a shadow that falls on this side like that. And it's going to light up this side a bit more. But then once we get to this side of the mountain, the shadows are going to be falling pretty consistently all over this side of the mountain, because it's just not being exposed to the sunlight. And I tend to draw this with, short, kind of choppy pencil strokes, just because it adds more texture to it, and it doesn't make everything perfectly black, so you get little bits of white in there, which could represent, the sun reflecting off different rocks and so on. Add a little bit more over there. Make sure you shade in the top a bit like that. And then what I often add is a little bit more texture on top of this, so just some specks here and here, a little bit of slopes showing the general angle of the direction that things are going, and just rough it up just a little bit so it's not super smooth, because mountains just don't look like that. And there you go. That's basically all you need. You can add a little bit more shading if you want. You can add more texture or less texture, but you end up with a mountain that looks like it's popping right up out of the page. The big things here are the way that the shadows are falling on the mountain, the way that you can see a little bit behind it over there, and the way that these ridges are having shadows cast. It makes the mountain look crinklier, and it makes it look like it's formed by erosion, which makes it look much more realistic. So it takes a bit more time for sure than doing it some of the other ways that I've shown in the past. But if you spend a little bit more time working on this and do a whole bunch of them, you end up with a scene that looks much more realistic, and it's much easier to visualize what travel and transportation across a mountain like that would look like, right? So what kind of obstacles are you going to run into? Are you going to deal with these ridges? Are you going to skirt around them? If you have things like rivers and streams, you're going to be able to figure out how those flow out of the mountain, because they're going to follow those crevices and so on. You're going to get a much more realistic effect. All right, hopefully that was helpful for you, and thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, including more tutorials, more map making examples, and things like old school Dungeons & Dragons reviews, remember to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.